From mop to boardroom, how God turned a cleaner into a CEO. She wiped tables when no one was watching. But one day, God set her at the head of the table. Before we begin this powerful story, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell icon so you don't miss any of our faith-filled narratives. And at the end, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? This is the story of Hadassah, a 40-year-old woman whose hands knew the weight of a mop, but whose heart knew the weight of prayer. Her journey reminds us that no circumstance can bury the dreams God has planted. Now, step into the silence of an empty office, where destiny begins to whisper. The building slept under the hush of the city. Beyond the tall glass facade, towers flickered with leftover lights, while here only the echo of fluorescent bulbs hummed against polished marble floors. The air carried a faint mixture of cedar wood polish and cold metal, a scent that clung to the night like a secret. Hadassah pushed the mop slowly across the endless corridor, her worn sneakers squeaking in rhythm. Her curly chestnut hair framed a round face, strands escaping as beads of sweat traced her temples. Her hazel eyes shone with quiet resilience, and as always, a smile curved her lips, gentle, unwavering. That smile wasn't for show. It was her survival. Every stain she scrubbed, every bin she emptied, every fingerprint erased from glass walls. She did it with the quiet conviction that God saw. "Lord," she whispered, almost a song under her breath, "if you give me strength to finish tonight, I will keep believing that tomorrow you will open a door no one can close." Her voice was swallowed by the emptiness, but she imagined angels carrying it upward. The office was a world she never belonged to. Mahogany desks, leather chairs, glowing screens with numbers she couldn't interpret. Yet as she cleaned, she noticed everything. The half-empty coffee cups, the scribbled notes left on whiteboards, the books abandoned on desks with bookmarks sticking out. These objects told stories of power, of decisions shaping futures she could never touch. Still, Hadassah smiled. Not many noticed her, but she noticed them. The executives walked past her in the mornings with perfumes of sandalwood, musk, and expensive flowers, never once thinking that the woman behind the mop noticed every detail. She did, and quietly she dreamed. Tonight was different. The building felt heavier, as though someone else was awake. Hadassah paused, her hazel eyes flicking toward the large glass office at the end of the hall, the one with blinds always half closed. Inside, a faint glow remained. Her heartbeat picked up. She tightened her grip on the mop handle. The wood was smooth from years of use, warm against her palm, almost like a companion. She inhaled deeply. Lemon cleaner mixed with air conditioning chilled to perfection. She continued humming softly, that ever-present smile illuminating her face even though no one could see it. But someone could. Through the blinds, a pair of eyes observed her. The silhouette of a man in a dark suit leaned back in his chair, the faint red glow of a digital clock behind him. He watched her without movement, as though she had unknowingly become the subject of an unspoken test. Hadassah didn't know. She kept working, her lips whispering scriptures between breaths. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The words floated into the sterile air, clashing beautifully with the cold silence of wealth. When she finished the corridor, she placed the mop against the wall and knelt near a stubborn stain by the elevator. Her fingers, rough from chemicals, scrubbed hard. The smell of bleach burned her nose, but her smile never faded. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from her daughter. "Mom, don't forget, tomorrow is the school meeting. Please come." Hadassah closed her eyes. She rarely made it. Work always stole her hours. Yet she texted back quickly, fingers trembling. "I'll be there, meu amor, I promise." She placed the phone back, exhaling. Little did she know her promise was overheard by a man who never believed promises could be kept. The office door at the end of the hall creaked open. Hadassah froze, still kneeling on the floor. From the shadows shined polished black shoes, then the silhouette of a tall man in a perfectly cut suit. The air seemed to shift with his presence, carrying a trace of bergamot cologne and authority. He stood in silence, watching her as if studying every detail, her hair escaping its bun, her tired hands, the way she still smiled despite exhaustion. Finally, his voice broke the stillness. "Why are you still here?" The question sliced the air like glass. Hadassah blinked, rising slowly, her mop bucket squeaking at her side. She clutched the handle tighter, forcing her smile to remain. "Because the floor is not yet finished, sir," she answered softly, her accent lacing her words with warmth. The man tilted his head, intrigued. His eyes, sharp as steel, narrowed slightly. "That's not what I asked," he said, his tone deep, deliberate. "I asked why you are still here." The hallway seemed to close in around her, the humming lights suddenly louder, the cold air sharper against her skin. Hadassah's heart raced, but her smile didn't falter. She lowered her gaze respectfully, then looked back up with quiet courage. "Because until the work is done, sir, I cannot go home." Silence stretched. The man studied her as though her answer unlocked something he wasn't ready to admit. His expression softened for just a second, then vanished behind composure. He stepped closer. "What is your dream, Hadassah?" The sound of her name in his mouth startled her. She never remembered telling him. Her hazel eyes widened. The mop slipped slightly in her grasp. "My dream," she echoed, her voice trembling but steady. "Yes," he said, his gaze unwavering. "When no one is watching, when you are alone, scrubbing these floors, what do you whisper to your God?" The weight of his words pressed against her chest. The fluorescent light flickered overhead. Her lips parted, ready to answer, but the words froze on her tongue. For the first time in years, Hadassah's eternal smile faltered. The CEO knows her name and her prayers. The question lingered in the air like smoke. Hadassah's smile trembled, her chest rising and falling with the weight of unsaid words. Across from her, the man in the tailored suit stood motionless, his frame outlined by the cold fluorescent glow. His black shoes shone like mirrors, his tie perfectly knotted, his watch gleaming under the sterile light. Everything about him spoke of control, precision, command. Yet his eyes, steel gray, restless, searched her hazel ones as though he were looking for something he had long lost. Hadassah swallowed. Her throat felt dry, as though the air itself had turned to dust. "My dream," she whispered, gripping the wooden handle of her mop like a lifeline. The man stepped closer, the faint scent of bergamot and leather cutting through the smell of bleach. "Yes, don't give me an answer about work, Hadassah. Tell me the one that keeps you alive when nobody sees you." Her eyes darted toward the window at the end of the hall. Outside, the city sparkled with lights, lives rushing, dreams unfolding, destinies colliding. She felt so small against that canvas. Still, her smile returned, a tired, fragile but genuine smile. "My dream, sir, is to see my daughter sit at a table I could never reach, a table where people listen, where voices matter." For a second, the CEO's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, his lips pressing into a thin line. He was not expecting that. "You don't want that seat for yourself?" he asked, voice low. Hadassah shook her head gently, curls brushing her face. "I am 40 years old. My hands are worn, my back aches, but my heart still believes she can reach what I could not." Her words carried no bitterness, only faith. The man studied her longer. The clock behind him ticked 11:47 p.m. The building seemed to hold its breath. At last, he spoke again. "You clean these floors as if they were made of gold." Hadassah's smile deepened. "Because they are not mine, sir. They belong to someone else's dream. And if I do not treat them with care, how can I ask God to entrust me with more?" The CEO's eyes narrowed. He had heard speeches from investors, politicians, visionaries, but never from a woman holding a mop. They stood in silence, the hum of electricity filling the gap. Finally, he extended a hand. "I am Daniel." The name fell heavy, like a stone skipping across water. Hadassah hesitated before wiping her palm against her faded uniform and placing her rough, calloused hand into his. The contrast was stark, his skin smooth, warm, commanding. hers scarred, dry, marked by labor. Their handshake lasted longer than expected. Daniel released her slowly, as though reluctant to let go. "You are different, Hadassah," he said, his tone unreadable. She tilted her head, still smiling. "Everyone is different, sir. We just forget to notice." His lips curved almost imperceptibly, not quite a smile, but a flicker of something human. He turned, walking back toward his office. His polished shoes echoed against the tiles, each step precise. At the doorway he paused. Without looking back, he spoke, "Remember what you told me tonight." The glass door closed softly behind him. Hadassah stood frozen, the mop still in her hand. Her hazel eyes shimmered with confusion. Why would a man like him, a CEO with the world at his feet, stop to ask a cleaner about her dreams? Her knees trembled. She leaned against the wall, whispering under her breath, "Lord, what does this mean?" Her smile faltered just for a second, replaced by a flicker of fear. But as always, it returned, glowing faintly under the sterile lights. The following nights, she continued her work, yet she felt his presence even when his office was dark. She imagined his sharp eyes behind the blinds, his voice echoing, "What do you whisper to your God?" She tried to push the thought away, but it lingered. 2 days later, as she emptied trash bins, she overheard a conversation. In the boardroom, voices clashed. Men in suits argued over numbers projected onto glowing screens. The room smelled of strong coffee and expensive cologne. Through the half-open door, she saw Daniel sitting at the head of the table. His posture was commanding, but his eyes, they looked distant, distracted. Suddenly, his gaze flicked toward the corridor, toward her. Their eyes met. Hadassah froze, clutching a trash bag to her chest. He didn't look away. The executives noticed his silence. "Sir, what's your decision?" one of them pressed. Daniel finally broke the stare, his voice firm. "We will wait." The room murmured in confusion, but Hadassah knew he wasn't talking about business. That night, when the building was empty again, Daniel appeared at the end of the corridor once more. He carried no briefcase, no papers, just himself, his presence heavy with unspoken questions. "Hadassah," he called softly. She turned, her hazel eyes glowing under the flickering lights. "Yes, sir?" He stepped closer, his tone lower this time. "Do you know why I stay late at night?" Hadassah tilted her head, curls brushing her cheeks. "Because the day is not enough for you," she guessed. He chuckled faintly, the sound rough, almost bitter. "No, because when the world sleeps I cannot escape myself." Her smile deepened, kind but piercing. "And what do you see when you cannot escape?" Daniel's eyes darkened, his jaw flexed. He looked away, toward the glass walls that reflected his own figure. A man who has everything and nothing. The silence that followed was thick, filled with something raw. Hadassah stepped closer, her mop forgotten. Her voice was calm, almost tender. "Sir, even emptiness is an invitation. Sometimes God strips everything so he can show us what matters." Her words struck him like a blow. He inhaled sharply as though the air had shifted. For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen. The clock ticked past midnight. The building's air conditioning hummed like a lullaby. The scent of cleaning products mixed with Daniel's cologne, creating a strange harmony of worlds colliding. Finally, he spoke again. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." Hadassah's smile brightened, soft but unwavering. "Maybe because you've spoken to many people who listen with their ears, but none who listen with their heart." Daniel's steel-grey eyes locked with her hazel ones. For a moment, it felt as though two entirely different universes had collided in that empty corridor. And then, with a tone that carried more weight than he realized, Daniel whispered, "Don't disappear, Hadassah. I may need your voice more than you know." The CEO who rules a tower of glass admits he may need the cleaner's voice. The city was alive even at night, its streets buzzing with hurried footsteps, bus engines coughing smoke, and neon signs flickering against cracked sidewalks. But for Hadassah, the night was not alive. It was long, heavy, and merciless. She carried her cleaning cart toward the service elevator, the wheels squeaking under the weight. 2 other women in grey uniforms waited there too, whispering between themselves, their laughter sharp as broken glass. One of them, Marta, tall, thin, her dark hair tied back severely, glanced at Hadassah with a smirk. "So I heard you had a little chat with the boss the other night," Marta said, dragging the words like poison. The other woman chuckled, folding her arms. "What was it, Hadassah? Did he ask you to polish his shoes too?" Hadassah smiled gently, the same unshakable curve of her lips. "No, he only asked me a question." Marta raised a brow, leaning closer. "And what could a man like him possibly want from you?" Hadassah's hazel eyes softened. She did not fight back, only whispered, "Sometimes God uses the unexpected to speak." The laughter came louder this time, crueler. "God? Hadassah, you've been scrubbing floors for 20 years. If God cared, wouldn't you be somewhere else by now?" Her heart ached, but her smile remained. She pushed the cart into the elevator, turning her back to their jeers. As the doors closed, she murmured under her breath, "Lord, you open doors no one can shut, and you shut doors no one can open." The bus that carried her home later groaned with age. Its seats cracked, the smell of gasoline heavy in the air. She sat by the window, clutching her bag tightly. Beside her, an older woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes leaned closer. "You work at that glass tower, don't you?" she asked, voice rough like gravel. Hadassah nodded. "Yes, ma'am. At night." The woman studied her. "I've seen you before, always smiling." "Why?" Hadassah turned, surprised by the bluntness. "Because God is good." The woman scoffed. "Good? Look at your hands. Look at your shoes. You smile because you're afraid that if you stop, you'll collapse." Hadassah inhaled deeply, her curls brushing her cheeks as she turned her hazel eyes toward the window. "I smile because if I don't, the world will teach my daughter to frown. I would rather she inherit my hope than my pain." The older woman fell silent, staring at Hadassah as though trying to decide if she was naive or the wisest person she'd ever met. 2 nights later, the silence of the office returned. Hadassah pushed her mop across the floor, humming softly, her voice filling the emptiness. And then she heard him again. "Hadassah!" Her name, deep and commanding, echoed from behind. She turned. Daniel stood at the end of the corridor, hands in his pockets, his suit jacket undone, his tie slightly loosened, a rare imperfection. His eyes were darker than usual, stormy. "You believe in doors," he said, his voice steady but edged. "Doors that God opens, doors that God closes." Hadassah blinked, nodding. "Yes, sir." Daniel took a step closer, his polished shoes striking the floor with precision. "What about the doors that never open? The ones you've been knocking on for decades? Did God forget them?" Her smile flickered but returned. She gripped the mop tighter. "No. Sometimes a closed door is protection. Sometimes it is preparation." Daniel's lips curled into something between a smirk and a grimace. "That's a pretty answer. But tell me, Hadassah, how many more years will you hide behind it until you're too old to dream?" The words pierced, sharp as a blade. Hadassah lifted her chin, her hazel eyes glowing with quiet fire. "I am 40 years old, sir. My back aches, my knees hurt. But my faith is not wrinkled. My faith is young. My faith is alive." For the first time, Daniel's composure faltered. His chest rose sharply, his fists tightening in his pockets. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Faith doesn't pay bills. Faith doesn't build empires. Faith doesn't stop loneliness from eating you alive at night." Hadassah's smile deepened, tender but unyielding. "Faith is the only reason I'm still standing here speaking to you." The silence that followed was thick, electric. The hum of the lights above seemed louder, the air colder. Daniel's steel-grey eyes locked with hers, and for a moment it felt as though he were the one about to break. Before he could speak again, Hadassah's phone rang in her pocket, shattering the tension. She pulled it out, frowning at the screen. It wasn't her daughter. It was a number she didn't recognize, but it was from the very company whose floors she cleaned. Her hands trembled as she answered. "Hello?" A crisp female voice replied. "Mrs. Hadassah." This is the executive office. We would like to invite you to attend a meeting tomorrow morning. Not as staff, as a guest. Hadassa's heart stopped. The mop slipped from her hand, clattering against the floor. Daniel's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He knew nothing of this. The voice continued, "Please confirm if you can attend." Hadassa's lips parted, her eternal smile trembling between disbelief and awe. Yes, I can," she whispered. As the call ended, silence swallowed the hall once more. Daniel stared at her, unreadable. And Hadassa, with tears pooling in her hazel eyes, whispered under her breath, "Lord, is this the door?" Hadassa is mysteriously invited to the boardroom meeting. But who opened this door, and why? Morning light bled through thin curtains in Hadassa's small apartment. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of detergent from clothes drying on a line near the window. Her daughter, Raquel, 16, with bright, curious eyes, watched her mother nervously as Hadassa buttoned a simple blouse she had ironed 3 times, hoping the fabric would look less worn. Her curly hair was tied back carefully, and her hazel eyes searched the mirror as though it were an enemy. "Mom," Raquel said, her voice trembling, "why are they calling you into a meeting? You're not one of them." "Nah," Hadassa smiled, that same unshakable smile that always lit her face, even when her heart was a battlefield. She cupped her daughter's cheek. "Maybe, meu amor, they just need to hear a different voice, and maybe God has chosen that voice to be mine today." Raquel's lips parted, her eyes watering. "But what if they laugh at you?" Hadassa pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Then I will smile, because laughter cannot take away what God gives." The glass tower rose into the sky, gleaming like a monument to ambition. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the morning rush. Executives in tailored suits, heels clicking like metronomes, voices sharp with urgency. Hadassa walked through them, clutching her worn bag to her chest. Her blouse was clean but plain, her shoes polished but old. She felt every pair of eyes sliding over her, curious, judgmental, dismissive. At the elevator, a young receptionist stopped her. "Ma'am, service staff use the—" Before she could finish, another voice cut through, deep and commanding. "She's with me." Hadassa turned. Daniel stood there, tall, composed, his suit a perfect shade of midnight blue, his tie knotted with precision. His steel-grey eyes didn't leave hers. The receptionist faltered, muttering apologies. Daniel gestured toward the elevator. "Come." Hadassa stepped in beside him. The doors closed with a soft chime, sealing them in a silence thicker than air. She clutched her bag tighter, her hazel eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers. "Sir," she whispered, "I don't understand why I'm here." Daniel's gaze never left her. His voice was low, edged with curiosity. "Neither do I." The boardroom was a cathedral of power. A long table of dark walnut stretched across the room, polished to perfection, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. The air smelled of espresso and ambition. Screens on the wall displayed graphs and numbers, lines rising and falling like heartbeats. Executives filled the seats, men and women in tailored suits, their expressions sharp, their whispers buzzing like bees. Hadassa hesitated at the doorway, her smile faltering for the first time. Daniel leaned closer, his voice brushing against her ear. "Do not shrink, Hadassa. You walk into this room with more authority than you know." Her hazel eyes widened, her heart racing. "Why do you say that?" "Because you are not here by man's invitation," Daniel replied. "You are here because God allowed it." When she stepped into the room, the murmurs grew louder. One man with silver hair leaned toward another, whispering loudly enough to be heard. "Is this a joke, a cleaner at the table?" Another woman in a crimson suit folded her arms. "This is absurd. We are wasting time." Hadassa placed her bag gently on the floor, standing with her back straight, her smile steady. Her hands trembled, but she clasped them in front of her. Daniel took his seat at the head of the table, his presence silencing the room. He gestured toward her. "This is Hadassa, and today you will listen to her." The uproar was immediate. "Listen to her? Daniel, have you lost your mind? This company runs on strategy, not fairy tales." Daniel raised a hand, his steel-grey eyes cutting through the noise. The room fell silent. "Hadassah, speak." Her throat tightened. She looked around, every face sharp, skeptical, hostile. Her hazel eyes glistened under the harsh white lights. She opened her mouth, her voice trembling. I clean your offices every night. I know where the dust settles, where the stains remain, where the leaks hide." Snickers erupted around the table. One man leaned back, smirking. "What does this have to do with running a company?" Hadassah's smile didn't falter. "Everything, because what is ignored grows. What is neglected spreads. And one day it costs more than anyone imagined." The room fell quiet. She stepped closer to the table, her eyes moving from one executive to another. "I see things you don't. Not because I'm smarter, but because I'm lower. I see what falls to the floor while you look at the ceiling. I see what cracks when you walk away." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes locked on her, unreadable. A young executive, barely 30, leaned forward, scoffing. "So you're saying you can run this company because you mop floors?" Hadassah's smile softened. "No, I am saying this company can learn something from a mop, because cleaning is not about removing dirt. It is about restoring order, and leadership is the same." Her words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. The crimson-suited woman slammed her hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. Daniel, end this charade." But before Daniel could respond, Hadassah spoke again, her voice steady, her hazel eyes burning with quiet fire. "You invited me here. I will speak. Then you may dismiss me. But you cannot dismiss truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Every executive stared at her, caught between disbelief and curiosity. And then, from the end of the table, a voice broke through, cold, mocking. "So tell us, Hadassah, if your God is so powerful, why has he kept you with a mop for 40 years? The words stabbed deep, but Hadassah's smile didn't waver. Her hazel eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. She placed her hand gently on the table, her rough fingers brushing the polished wood. "Because he was teaching me to serve before he called me to lead." Daniel's chest rose sharply, his steel-grey eyes widening just enough to betray the storm inside him. The boardroom erupted in whispers, shock rippling across the table. Hadassah stood taller, her smile glowing like dawn. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew a door had opened, and no man could shut it. Hadassah silences a boardroom with her faith-filled words, but enemies within the company are already sharpening their knives. The boardroom air was thick, heavy with tension. The faint hiss of the air conditioning did nothing to cool the fire rising in the room. Papers rustled, chairs creaked, whispers darted like daggers across the table. Hadassah stood near the end of the polished walnut table, her hands resting lightly on its edge, her hazel eyes shimmering under the cold lights. She had spoken her truth, and the silence that followed felt eternal. Then, the unexpected. A pair of hands began to clap, slow, deliberate. All eyes turned. It was a woman in her 50s, elegant in a navy blue suit, her hair streaked with silver. She leaned forward, her rings glinting under the light. "Well said," she murmured. "Very well said." Her applause grew firmer. A few others hesitated, then joined in, not out of conviction but out of curiosity. But just as quickly, another voice cut through, dripping with disdain. "This is insanity." The man who spoke was tall, with slicked back hair and a jaw clenched tight. His name was Mr. Collins, one of the longest-serving board members. His voice was sharp, his words laced with venom. He pushed back his chair, standing, his finger stabbing the air. "Daniel, have you lost your mind? You bring a janitor into this sacred room and let her preach to us about leadership. This is a corporation, not a church." Daniel's steel-grey eyes narrowed, but before he could answer, Hadassah lifted her chin and spoke. Her voice was steady. "Sir, forgive me, but if this table is so sacred, why is it filled with fear and not truth?" Gasps rippled through the room. Colin's face turned red. "How dare you?" Hadassah's smile did not falter. I dare because you asked, and you cannot unask the question. The woman in navy spoke again, calmer. Let her finish. We may not like her words, but we cannot deny their weight. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Hadassah, as though trying to read the script of heaven written on her face. Continue, he said softly. Hadassah stepped closer to the table, her eyes meeting each face. You speak of numbers, of profit margins, of growth, but numbers don't tell you where your people cry. Numbers don't tell you where they break. I see the brokenness you ignore. I hear the silence you never notice, and silence speaks louder than you think. The room was still. Even Collins hesitated, though his fists clenched at his sides. Hadassah continued, her voice lowering to almost a whisper. I walk these halls when you are gone. I see employees leave papers crumpled with frustration, desks cluttered with despair, messages half-written then erased. I see the loneliness you hide behind suits and smiles. I clean it every night, and I pray for it, even when you don't know I do. A young executive, no more than 30, leaned forward, his voice trembling. You pray for us? Hadassah's hazel eyes met his, her smile tender. Yes, every night, because even in glass towers, hearts can shatter, and only God can mend them. The young man swallowed hard, looking away, ashamed. Collins slammed his fist on the table. This is manipulation. She's using religion to shame us. Daniel's voice finally cut through, low and sharp. Enough, Collins. But Collins turned on him, his anger boiling. No, Daniel, enough of you. This is not leadership. This is weakness. You are letting a cleaner humiliate us in our own boardroom. If you continue down this path, you'll destroy everything we've built. The words echoed like thunder. Hadassah's heart raced, but she stepped forward, her voice clear. What you've built without God will collapse without God. A house without foundation may look tall, but the storm will tell the truth. Her words struck like lightning. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his steel-gray eyes locked on Hadassah. You say the storm will tell the truth, he said quietly. But what happens if the storm is already here? Hadassah's lips parted. She had no rehearsed answer. Her smile softened, trembling slightly. Then, she whispered, the only safe place is in the hands of the one who commands the storm. The room froze. The words hovered like fire, burning through every heart that heard them. Collins sneered, but his voice faltered. You speak like a prophet, but this is a business. Faith has no place here. Hadassah's eyes met his, unwavering. Faith is the only reason this place still stands. A murmur spread across the table. Some nodded subtly, others scoffed. The board was divided, the atmosphere electric. Daniel rose slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. His presence filled the room, his voice resonant, controlled. Enough debate, he said firmly. You have all heard Hadassah. Whether you agree or not, you cannot deny she has spoken truth, and truth does not need permission to enter a room. He glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Hadassah, you may step out now. Her heart pounded. She bent, picking up her bag, her hazel eyes scanning the room one last time. She offered a small bow of respect. Thank you for hearing me, she said softly. As she turned toward the door, Collins muttered under his breath, This isn't over. Hadassah paused, her hand on the door handle. She smiled, her voice calm but firm. No, sir, it is only beginning. And dear Hadassah has shaken the boardroom to its core, splitting the council. Collins becomes her open enemy, while Daniel's loyalty remains a mystery. The sky outside the glass tower was dark, clouds swirling like a restless sea. Rain struck the windows with sharp, relentless taps, as if the heavens themselves echoed the turmoil inside. The boardroom was emptier now, but the storm had only grown stronger. Collins paced like a predator, his shoes clacking against the polished floor. His voice sliced the air. This cannot continue. We are a company built on discipline, numbers, and strategy, not sermons from a woman with a mop. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable, his steel-gray eyes locked on the storm outside. His silence only fueled Collins' rage. "Daniel!" Collins slammed his palm on the table, papers scattering. "Do you not see what's happening? You've given her a platform, and now the others are whispering. She is poisoning this place with false hope." At the far corner, Hadassah stood quietly, her hands folded in front of her. She had not been dismissed yet, though part of her longed to flee. The hostility in the room pressed against her chest like a weight. She closed her hazel eyes for a moment, whispering softly, "Lord, give me strength not to shrink. Even if they tear me down, let me stand." Collins turned on her, his voice sharp. "You. What are you still doing here? Do you think you belong at this table? Do you think your God cares about stock prices and quarterly reports?" Hadassah opened her eyes slowly. Her smile, faint but steady, returned. "I do not think, sir, I know. Because God cares for people, and people sit at this table. People fill this company. Without them, your reports are only empty paper." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few nodded hesitantly. Others avoided eye contact. Collins' face turned crimson. "Enough of this nonsense," he pointed at Daniel. "End it now, or I will call for a vote to remove you from this chair." The air froze. Hadassah's heart stopped. Remove Daniel. Her hazel eyes flicked toward him, searching his face for a sign of reaction. Daniel finally turned from the storm outside. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "You want to remove me, Collins?" "Yes," Collins spat. "You've lost control. You've let this woman, this cleaner, make a mockery of our board. You're weak." Daniel rose slowly, his tall frame commanding the room. His suit seemed to absorb the stormlight pouring through the windows. His steel-grey eyes locked on Collins, cold and sharp as a blade. "Careful," Daniel said softly. "Weakness is not always what it seems." The silence that followed was suffocating. The storm outside thundered, lightning flashing across the skyline. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but carrying weight. "I have built this company with strategy, yes. With numbers, yes. But numbers do not bleed, numbers do not sacrifice, and numbers will not save us when the storm comes. People will." He gestured toward Hadassah. "She speaks truth, more truth than half of you have spoken in years, and you hate it, not because she is wrong, but because she exposes what you fear." Gasps echoed. Collins' jaw dropped, his fury trembling just beneath the surface. Hadassah's hazel eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. She whispered, "Lord, you are fighting for me." But Collins snapped, his voice shaking with venom. "This is madness. You're letting a woman with no degree, no pedigree, no authority speak over us. She is nothing." Hadassah's heart cracked at the words. For a moment her smile wavered. Her knees felt weak, memories flooded, years of scrubbing floors, of being invisible, of promises broken. She almost spoke, but Daniel's voice thundered first. "Enough!" His fist struck the table, the sound reverberating like thunder. Everyone jumped. The storm outside seemed to echo his fury. Daniel's eyes burned, his voice fierce. "You call her nothing, then you call me nothing. Because I see more strength in her than I see in this entire board combined." The room went silent. Hadassah stared at him, her lips trembling. She whispered, almost inaudible, "Why do you defend me?" Daniel turned his steel-grey gaze toward her. For the first time, the armor around his voice cracked. "Because when you speak, Hadassah, I hear what I've been searching for all my life." Her breath caught. The room seemed to vanish, only his words lingering. Collins scoffed, breaking the moment. "You've lost your mind, Daniel. If you continue down this path, you will lose everything." Daniel stepped closer, his presence towering. "Then let me lose everything, because I'd rather lose with truth than win with lies." The words rang like a sword through the storm. Hadassah clutched her chest, her hazel eyes glowing with tears and awe. She whispered under her breath, "Thank you, Lord. You are here in this storm." But as she looked at Daniel, she knew the battle had only begun. Daniel openly defends Hadassah, risking his position, while Collins plots to destroy them both. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the tower. The glass walls reflected the pale morning light, streaked with raindrops that shimmered like silver tears. The boardroom was silent. The leather chairs creaked softly as executives shifted uncomfortably. Tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Daniel stood at the head of the table, tall and unwavering, his steel-grey eyes scanning the room. He had spoken fire the night before, and now every gaze waited for his next move. Hadassah sat quietly near the corner, her hands folded in her lap, her hazel eyes lowered. She still wore her uniform, a stark contrast to the suits that surrounded her. Yet her presence filled the room, more than the polished gold pens and glowing screens. Daniel exhaled slowly, his voice steady, but carrying weight that pressed against every heart in the room. There comes a time when every leader must ask, "Have I built something strong enough to stand without me?" Murmurs spread across the table. He continued, his eyes fixed on the empty leather chair beside him. "I have carried this company for decades, but no empire lasts forever. No crown sits on the same head eternally. The question is not who will replace me, but who will lead you forward with truth." Collins slammed his palm on the table, his voice venomous. "This is absurd. You're too young to talk about stepping down. And if you do, there are senior executives far more qualified than who?" Daniel cut him off sharply. His voice echoed like a blade striking steel. "Than the one who speaks with more courage than all of you combined?" Gasps rippled. Eyes darted. Collins' face turned red with fury. Daniel turned, his gaze landing on Hadassah. The world seemed to still. Hadassah's breath caught in her chest. Her hazel eyes widened as Daniel's words sank in. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. No, not me. I clean these floors. I do not sit in these chairs." Daniel stepped closer, his voice lower now but filled with conviction. "Hadassah, you have done more than clean these floors. You have carried this building with your prayers. You have seen what no one else sees. You have spoken what no one else dares. Leadership is not about status, it is about vision, and you have it." Her lips trembled, her smile faltering for the first time. "Vision? Sir, my vision has always been to survive, to feed my daughter, to make it through the night with faith intact. That is not the vision of a CEO." Daniel shook his head. His eyes softened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through. "No, Hadassah, that is exactly the vision of a leader. Because you understand that people matter more than numbers. You see what the rest of us forget." Collins rose to his feet, pointing at her with fury. "This is madness. She is uneducated, untrained, unfit. Daniel, you insult us all by even suggesting this." Hadassah stood slowly, her hazel eyes meeting his with quiet fire. "Sir, do not mistake humility for weakness. Do not mistake service for insignificance. I may not have your degree, but I have wisdom carved by struggle. I may not speak with polished words, but I speak with truth. And truth, whether whispered by a janitor or shouted by a king, is still truth." The room froze. Her voice, though gentle, carried an authority no title could manufacture. Daniel placed his hand on the back of the empty leather chair. His voice dropped, deep and commanding. "This seat will not remain empty for long. And when I leave, the one who will occupy it is already among us." Every eye turned to Hadassah. Her knees weakened. She clutched the edge of the table, her hazel eyes brimming with tears. She whispered, trembling, "Lord, what are you doing?" Daniel's gaze locked on hers. "Hadassah," he said firmly, "you were never meant to stay at the edge of the room. You were always meant to lead from the center of it." The air grew electric, hearts pounding, whispers swirling like wind. Some faces showed awe, others disgust. Collins's glare could have set fire to the table, but Hadassah stood, trembling yet unbroken, her eternal smile returning faintly through tears. "I am not worthy of this seat," she whispered. Daniel stepped closer, his voice softer now. "None of us are. That is why God chooses." The empty chair now waits for Hadassah, but the council is divided, and Collins will stop at nothing to block her path. The morning sun struck the glass tower like fire, scattering golden light across the skyline. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in streaks on the windows, scars of the night before. Hadassah stood in the lobby, her reflection caught in the polished marble floor. Gone was the grey uniform, the rubber gloves, the mop bucket. Today, she wore a simple navy blazer, second-hand but pressed with care, a white blouse beneath it, and black shoes that clicked against the stone with hesitant authority. Her hazel eyes shimmered with both fear and faith. Her chestnut curls framed her round face, and as always, a smile curved her lips. Not the tired smile of survival, but the radiant smile of a woman walking into prophecy. The elevator ride felt endless. Each ding of the rising floors echoed like a drumbeat in her chest. At the top, the doors opened into the boardroom, the cathedral of power she once entered with trembling hands and cleaning supplies. Now she walked in with nothing but her faith. The long walnut tables stretched before her. Executives whispered, their eyes sharp, some mocking, some curious. Collins sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, fury carved into every line of his face. And at the head of the table stood Daniel. His steel-grey eyes met hers, unreadable, yet steady. He gestured toward the empty leather chair beside him, the one that had haunted her since the storm. "Hadassah," his voice carried through the room, firm, commanding. "This seat is waiting." Her knees threatened to give way. She took a step forward, her palms damp, her breath uneven. The weight of years pressed against her. Every floor scrubbed, every night spent in silence, every prayer whispered into darkness. She stopped before the chair, staring at it as though it were a throne carved from fire. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice trembling. Collins seized the moment, slamming his palm on the table. "Of course she cannot. She is nothing but a cleaner. To place her here is to destroy everything we stand for." Hadassah turned slowly, her hazel eyes locking on him. Her smile remained, but her voice sharpened like steel. "Sir, you speak as though I asked for this seat. I did not. This chair is not mine by ambition. It is mine by assignment, and what God assigns, no man can unassign." Gasps filled the room. Collins recoiled, his face flushed with rage. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over the board. "You think leadership comes from pedigree, from money, from your universities and your titles. You are wrong. Leadership comes from vision, from courage, from truth. And in all my years here, only one has spoken truth without fear of this table." His hand pressed against the back of the chair. His eyes burned into Hadassah's. "Sit, Hadassah." Her chest rose sharply. Tears blurred her vision, but her smile deepened. Slowly, trembling, she lowered herself into the leather chair. The room shifted. It was as though the air itself bowed. The smell of polished wood and leather wrapped around her, mingling with the faint aroma of her simple perfume. Lavender, soft and unassuming. Her hands touched the armrests, fingers trembling against the smooth leather. The chair seemed too big, too heavy. But as she sat, peace washed over her, stronger than fear. Collins erupted. "This is blasphemy! This company will burn under her hand!" Hadassah lifted her chin, her hazel eyes steady, her voice calm yet firm. "Then let it burn, if fire is what it takes to reveal gold. Because I will not lead with fear. I will lead with faith." The words struck like thunder. Even those who doubted fell into silence. Daniel's voice cut through, final and resolute. "The decision is made. Hadassah is no longer the woman who cleans your floors. She is the woman who will lead you forward." The room erupted, some clapping hesitantly, some protesting, some sitting in stunned silence. But through it all, Hadassah sat tall in the chair, her eternal smile glowing through tears. She whispered under her breath, unseen by all but heaven, "Thank you, Lord. You have lifted the lowly and set them at the head of the table." Hadassah takes her seat as CEO, a janitor no more, but a leader chosen by God. Weeks had passed since the day Hadassah sat in the chair that once seemed unreachable. The tower had not crumbled. The numbers on the screens had not collapsed. The company still breathed. But now it breathed differently. Where silence once reigned, there was listening. Where fear once bound decisions, courage began to stir. Where numbers once overshadowed souls, people started to matter again. Hadassah walked the hallways, not as the woman pushing a mop, but as the woman guiding vision. Yet, even in her new blazer, her hazel eyes still carried the same light, and her smile never left her face. Her daughter Raquel often visited her new office. The leather chair seemed too big for her small frame, but Raquel loved to sit in it, laughing. "One day, Mama, maybe me too." Hadassah would only smile, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Not maybe, meu amor. One day, yes, because the God who lifted me will lift you too." Collins, though still bitter, no longer held power to silence her. He had been outvoted, overruled, his fury drowned in the tide of change. Daniel remained by her side for a season, mentoring, advising, but always watching how her faith, not his strategies, became the compass of the boardroom. One evening, as the city lights twinkled below, Daniel leaned against the window, his voice softer than ever. "Hadassah, I built walls of glass, but you tore them down with words of faith. You've taught me more in weeks than I learned in years." Hadassah turned to him, her smile gentle. "It was never me, Daniel. It was always God." And so her story became a whisper in the city, then a fire across nations, the cleaner who became a CEO, not by ambition, not by strategy, but by the hand of God. Her life testified to every broken soul, every overlooked servant, every weary dreamer that heaven sees, heaven hears, and heaven lifts. Hadassah often returned to the janitor's closet, the small, forgotten room that once held her mop and bucket. She would stand there in silence, inhaling the familiar scent of cleaning supplies, running her hand over the old handle of the mop. And she would smile, because she knew, thrones may change, chairs may shift, but the God who lifts the humble never changes. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. 1 Samuel 2:8. Hadassah's journey reminds us that God still opens doors no one can shut. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, share this video with someone who needs hope, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Because your story, like Hadassah's, may be the next testimony of faith.